September 3rd, 1987, 11:23 in the morning. I was standing at my kitchen sink watching Harold load his golf clubs into the trunk of our Buick when I realized I hadn't spoken to my husband in 3 days. Not really spoken. Not about anything that mattered. We lived in the same house, shared the same bed, ate the same meals, and somehow had become complete strangers. I was 54 then. I thought that was just what happened to marriages that lasted. I was wrong about everything. That morning, watching Harold drive away without even waving goodbye, I made myself a promise. I would fix whatever was broken between us. I would try harder, be a better wife, more patient, more understanding. I had no idea I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. For 37 years, I've carried the weight of that decision. 37 years of trying to save a marriage that was already over. Just because I believe the lie that women my age tell themselves, that love means sacrifice, that patience is virtue, that staying is always better than leaving. Today, I'm here to tell you why everything you think you know about marriage after 60 is backwards. The smell of Harold's aftershave still makes me sick to my stomach. Old Spice. He wore it every single day for 43 years. When you live with someone that long, their scent becomes part of the air you breathe. You don't notice it until one day it's gone. And then you realize how much you hated it all along. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what really happens in a marriage when you hit 60, what nobody warns you about, what the advice columns and marriage counselors and well-meaning friends never say out loud. After 60, patience becomes a weapon. Not the kind you think, not the weapon he uses against you, though that happens too. The weapon you use against yourself. Every time you bite your tongue instead of speaking up, every time you let something slide to keep the peace, every time you tell yourself he's set in his ways or it's too late to change now, you're slowly killing the person you used to be. I learned this the hard way when Harold started forgetting my name. Not all at once. It started small. He'd call me Margaret sometimes, which was his first wife's name. She died in 1961, 6 years before we met. The first time it happened, I corrected him gently. I'm Virginia, honey. Margaret's been gone a long time. He looked confused for a moment, then laughed it off. Of course you are. Don't know where my head was. But it kept happening. Once a week, then twice, then every few days. And each time I would correct him with that same patient smile, that same gentle voice. Because that's what good wives do, right? We're patient with our husband's failings. We understand that aging is hard. We make allowances. Except Harold wasn't developing dementia. His memory was fine when it came to his golf scores, his stock portfolio, the names of every player on the Yankees roster from 1956. He could remember the exact date we bought our house, the price we paid for our first car, what the weather was like on our wedding day. But 3 times a week, he'd look at me across the breakfast table and call me Margaret. I spent 6 months making excuses for him before I realized the truth. He wasn't forgetting my name. He was wishing I was someone else. The morning I figured it out, I was dusting the bookshelf in our living room. Hidden behind his collection of Louis L'Amour westerns, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside were letters, love letters, written in Harold's careful script, but not to me. They were all addressed to my dearest Margaret. Dozens of them, written over the years we'd been married. Love letters to a dead woman. You would have understood, one of them said. You never would have complained about the thermostat or asked me to turn down the television. You knew how to let a man be a man. Another one. I see you in the garden sometimes, tending the roses you planted in 1960. Virginia tries, but she doesn't have your touch. She doesn't have your patience. And the one that broke something inside me that never healed. I married her too quickly after losing you. I thought time would help, but 30 years later, I still reach for you in my sleep. That's when I understood what nobody tells you about marriage after 60. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes it was never really there at all. I confronted Harold that evening, walked right up to him in his recliner, dropped the box of letters in his lap, and said, I found these. He looked down at the letters, then up at me, and for a moment I thought I saw shame in his eyes. But instead of apologizing, instead of explaining, he said, You had no right to go through my things. I had no right? I could feel 30 years of swallowed words rising in my throat. I've been married to a ghost for 30 years, and I had no right to know about it? Margaret was my wife, he said, like I hadn't been sitting across from him every morning for 3 decades. She'll always be my wife. You were just what came after. Just what came after. Those 5 words changed everything I thought I knew about love, about marriage, about my own life. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you're still here, maybe you understand what I'm talking about. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest. This gets worse before it gets better. That night, I did what I'd done 1,000 times before. I tried to fix it. I made Harold's favorite dinner, pot roast with those little red potatoes he liked. I set the table with our good china, the set we only used for holidays. I put on the blue dress he'd complimented once in 1995. I was going to be understanding, patient, forgiving. I was going to save our marriage through sheer force of will. Harold ate 3 helpings of pot roast and never looked up from his plate. When he finished, he pushed back his chair, patted his stomach, and said, Margaret always made the gravy a little thicker. Then he went to watch television. I sat at that table for 2 hours, staring at the good china, feeling like the biggest fool who ever lived. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. You know why? Because I was 62 years old, and I thought it was too late to start over. I thought divorce was for young people with their whole lives ahead of them. I thought women my age were supposed to make do with what they had. I thought wrong about everything. The next few years were a master class in self-destruction. I became an expert at swallowing my words, at making myself smaller, at pretending to be someone I wasn't. When Harold wanted the house colder, I wore sweaters. When he complained about the noise from my morning routine, I learned to get dressed in the dark. When he said my laugh was too loud during the news, I stopped laughing altogether. I was disappearing, piece by piece, and telling myself it was compromise. It was maturity. It was what long marriages looked like. My daughter Sarah visited for Christmas in 1994 and pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Mom," she said, "you're different. You're quiet." I told her I was just tired. "No," she said, "you're not tired. You're gone. It's like you're not even here anymore." She was right, but I couldn't hear it then. I thought she was being dramatic. Young people don't understand how hard marriage is, I told myself. They want everything to be easy, exciting, perfect. Real love requires sacrifice. Real commitment means staying even when it's hard. It wasn't until Harold's heart attack in 1999 that I realized what I'd actually sacrificed. We were at St. Mary's Hospital, and the doctor was explaining his condition to us. Harold was going to need surgery. It was serious, but his chances were good. The doctor asked if I had any questions, and I opened my mouth to speak and realized I had no idea what I wanted to ask. I'd spent so many years not having opinions, not asking questions, not taking up space, that when it mattered most, I had nothing to say. My husband was lying in a hospital bed, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. That night, sitting in the hospital chair beside Harold's bed, listening to the beep of his heart monitor, I tried to imagine what I would feel if he died. And the terrible truth was relief. Not sadness, not grief, relief. Because maybe then I could stop pretending to be Margaret. Maybe then I could remember who Virginia was supposed to be. Harold survived the surgery. He came home 3 weeks later with a list of medications and dietary restrictions and a new lease on life. He was grateful, he said. He appreciated me more than ever, he said. He wanted to make the most of whatever time we had left, he said. But nothing actually changed. He still called me Margaret twice a week. He still wrote letters to a dead woman. He still treated me like a consolation prize he'd been stuck with for 40 years. The only difference was now he did it while thanking me for taking such good care of him. That's when someone showed me something that changed everything. Someone once told me there are rules that change after 60. One of them says that sacrifice without boundaries isn't love, it's self-destruction. I wish I'd known that 30 years ago. If you want to know what those rules are, it's in the description. It was my neighbor, Betty Morrison. She was 78 then, had been widowed for 5 years, and she had this way of looking at the world that cut straight through all the nonsense. She came over one afternoon with a casserole and found me crying at my kitchen table. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, sitting down across from me. "Nothing," I said, which was my automatic response to everything by then. "I'm fine." Betty looked at me for a long moment, then reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "Virginia," she said, "do you know what I was doing at your age?" "I was planning my escape." "Your escape?" "From my marriage, from the life I'd built that wasn't really mine, from the person I'd become to keep someone else happy." She squeezed my hands. "I waited too long. Don't make my mistake." "But Harold needs me," I said. "He's sick. I can't just leave him now." "Harold needed Margaret," Betty said. "He's never needed you. And you know what? That's not your fault. But staying, that's your choice. And choices have consequences, even at our age, especially at our age." That conversation planted a seed that took 2 more years to grow. 2 more years of being called Margaret. 2 more years of shrinking myself to fit someone else's idea of who I should be. 2 more years of dying a little every day while calling it love. The end came on a Tuesday. Harold was reading the newspaper at breakfast, and I was standing at the stove making his eggs over easy, the only way he'd eat them, even though I preferred them scrambled. The morning news was on, and there was a story about a woman in California who'd left her husband after 50 years of marriage. She was 73 and starting her life over. Harold looked up from his paper and said, "Can you believe that? Selfish old woman breaking up a family at her age. Some people have no sense of commitment." Something snapped inside me. Not broke, snapped, like a rubber band that had been stretched too far for too long. "Her name was Dorothy," I said, still facing the stove. "Not old woman, Dorothy. And maybe she wasn't selfish. Maybe she was finally brave." "What did you say?" I turned around and looked at Harold, really looked at him for the first time in years. I said maybe she was brave. Maybe 50 years was enough time to figure out that being married isn't the same as being happy. Harold put down his paper. "Are you feeling all right, Margaret?" "My name," I said, and my voice was steadier than it had been in decades, "is Virginia." "I know what your name is." "No, you don't. You haven't known my name in years. You don't know what I like or what I want or what I dream about at night. You don't know anything about me because you've never cared enough to learn." Harold stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "Where is this coming from? We've been happy for 40 years. "You've been happy," I said. "I've been disappearing." That was the beginning of the end. Harold tried to dismiss my outburst as a phase, something I'd get over if we just ignored it long enough. But I was done ignoring things. I was done making myself smaller. I was done being Margaret's understudy in my own life. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Harold was shocked, then angry, then desperate. He promised to change. He promised to see a counselor. He promised to try harder. All the things I've been begging him to do for years, he suddenly wanted to do when faced with the consequences of not doing them. But it was too late. Not because I didn't love him. In some twisted way, I probably always would. It was too late because I finally loved myself more. The divorce was ugly. Harold fought me on everything: the house, the savings, even my grandmother's china. He told anyone who would listen that I'd lost my mind, that I was having some kind of breakdown, that after 40 years of happiness, I'd suddenly decided to throw it all away over nothing. Maybe he was right about the breakdown. Maybe you have to break down to break free. I was 67 when the divorce was final, older than my mother was when she died, old enough to know better, according to my sister, old enough to be grateful for what I had, according to my friends, old enough to stop rocking the boat, according to everyone who thought they knew what was best for me. But here's what I know now that I wish I'd known at 54, at 60, at 65. There's no such thing as too old to start over. There's no such thing as too late to choose yourself. There's no such thing as being too set in your ways to change everything. After everything I went through, I found the 60-year rule. It has 9 rules that explain exactly why everything I believed was wrong after 60. It changed how I see my family, my health, my money, everything. Check the description. I'm 91 now, and I've been single for 24 years. Not lonely, single. There's a difference. Lonely is what I was in my marriage. Single is what I am now, living in a small apartment overlooking the harbor, reading mystery novels until 2 a.m., eating ice cream for breakfast if I want to, laughing as loud as I please during whatever show I choose to watch. I have friends now, real friends who know my name and use it when they talk to me. I volunteer at the Literacy Center, teaching adults to read. I take painting classes at the community college. I've traveled to places Harold never wanted to go: Ireland, where my grandmother was born, and Maine, where I ate lobster for the first time at age 73. 3 years ago, I got a letter from Harold. He was in a nursing home by then, his health failing. The letter was short. Virginia, I'm sorry. I see now what I did to you, what I did to us. You were right to leave. I hope you're happy. I hope you found what you were looking for. Harold. I read that letter 3 times, then put it in the drawer with all the others: the important papers, the insurance documents, the things worth keeping. Not because I forgave him exactly, but because it was proof that I existed, proof that my name was Virginia, proof that leaving was the right choice, even if it took him 20 years to understand why. Harold died last winter. I went to his funeral, sat in the back, listened to people talk about what a devoted husband and father he was. They were right in a way. He was devoted, just not to me. After the service, his nephew came up to me. "Aunt Virginia," he said, "I always wondered why you left. Now I understand." I found boxes of letters in his house, letters to my Aunt Margaret, hundreds of them. It must have been hard living with that for so long. It was hard, harder than he could possibly know, but not as hard as staying would have been. So here's what nobody tells you about marriage after 60. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit it's over. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. I wasted 30 years trying to be someone I wasn't. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until you're 67 to remember your own name. Don't sacrifice yourself on the altar of other people's expectations. Don't let anyone convince you that your age disqualifies you from happiness. You want to know the truth about marriage after 60? Here it is. You're not too old to start over. You're not too set in your ways to change. You're not obligated to stay in a life that's killing you just because you've already invested so much time in building it. Life is short, even when you're 91, but it's never too short to choose yourself. It's never too late to remember who you were before you became what everyone else needed you to be. It's never too soon to stop being patient with people who don't deserve your patience. My name is Virginia Palmer. I'm 91 years old. I've been divorced for 24 years, and they've been the happiest years of my life. If that shocks you, good. Maybe it's time to examine what you think you know about love, about marriage, about what women our age are supposed to want. Maybe it's time to stop settling for less than you deserve, no matter how old you are. Maybe it's time to remember your own name.